A piercing scream echoed through a dark void, followed by converging light and a massive explosion. The cause was Aladdin, a young boy with no memory of his identity or why he was trapped there. A tremendously powerful giant knelt before him in willing submission. The giant, Uraltago, couldn't explain Aladdin's past or purpose, but he offered to grant the boy a single wish. He could provide absolute universal control, endless wealth, or eternal life. Despite these tempting options, Aladdin chose something entirely different. Meanwhile, in a rigid medieval world, Ali Baba lived a life of endless toil. Drowning in debt to a wealthy merchant named Butel, he worked tirelessly just to survive. While loading cargo onto a cart, Ali Baba spotted a boy ravenously devouring his employer's watermelons until his belly swelled like a balloon. It was Aladdin. Frustrated, Ali Baba rushed over to stop the bottomless pit, tempted to lash out, but Butel suddenly stepped outside to inspect the cargo. Ali Baba desperately tried to hide the half-eaten fruit, but it was no use. Completely oblivious to the tension, Aladdin noticed Butel's plump chest, immediately diving in to grope it while showering him with praise. Enraged, Butel hurled Aladdin aside and viciously stomped on Ali Baba. Unable to fight back, Ali Baba could only endure the humiliation and curse his rotten luck. That night, Aladdin followed Ali Baba home and devoured his entire emergency food supply like an absolute freeloader. Exasperated, Ali Baba muttered that he needed to conquer a dungeon soon or risk starving. Aladdin was intrigued to learn that dungeons were towering, mysterious structures that appeared 14 years ago, rumored to hold massive fortunes and powerful magical artifacts. Though fascinated, Aladdin couldn't ask more before Ali Baba passed out for the night. The next morning, as they walked the streets, Ali Baba daydreamed about using dungeon riches to woo beautiful women, while the equally shameless Aladdin was mesmerized by a street dancer. Bouncing around excitedly, Aladdin bumped into a beautiful girl carrying a basket of lemons. As she gathered the dropped fruit, the boys noticed heavy shackles on her ankles, marking her as a slave bound to a harsh, uncertain fate. Ashamed of the stares, the girl tried to cover her chains, spilling her entire basket in the process. Stepping right up to her, Aladdin played a single note on his flute, instantly snapping her chains and declaring her free. However, the crowd froze in terror instead of cheering, as freeing a slave was a capital offense. Before Ali Baba could do anything to fix the situation, Butel arrived on the scene. Unsure how the chains broke, Butel ordered his armed guards to seize them. In response, Aladdin played his flute, summoning a massive blue hand that swatted the guards away and slammed down near Butel. The resulting shockwave knocked everyone off their feet, terrifying the merchant into fainting. Spotting approaching soldiers, Ali Baba grabbed Aladdin and fled. Realizing Aladdin was a sorcerer, Ali Baba treated the boy to a hostess club, surrounding him with beautiful women to coax him into exploring a dungeon together. Aladdin enthusiastically agreed. Relieved, Ali Baba requested a girl for himself, only to be horrified when a massively muscular woman arrived instead. He stumbled out of the establishment later looking like his soul had entirely left his body. Right on cue, Butel tracked them down. To avoid further trouble, the pathetic-looking duo reluctantly returned to work for him. Their new, highly dangerous task was to transport wine along a road plagued by an alcohol-craving monster. Before setting off, they saw the red-haired slave girl and others locked in cages, destined to be worked to death in the mines. Ali Baba was furious but felt powerless to help. During the journey, Butel cruelly ranted that slaves were born as trash and would die as trash. Though seething, Ali Baba cowardly played along with the scumbag's words. Aladdin warned him that constantly lying would make him lose faith in himself. Just then, a thunderous rumble shook the ground, and the earth suddenly caved in beneath them. The caravan's camels couldn't outrun the collapsing earth, and the wagon wheels quickly shattered from the violent tremors. Selfishly, Butel ordered everyone to abandon the people in danger and save his precious wine instead. A gigantic man-eating plant, drawn by the alcohol, lurked at the bottom of the crater. Its thrashing tentacles sent massive shockwaves through the ground, causing a little girl and the red-haired slave girl to lose their footing and fall. Ali Baba lunged to catch them, but missed because Butyl shoved him aside to protect a wine barrel. Stunned, Alibaba listened as Butyl shrieked that the slaves were worth less than a single barrel of wine. Unable to stomach the merchant's cruelty any longer, Alibaba furiously punched Butyl in the face and leapt into the pit to save them. The massive flower was already closing to digest its prey, but from above, Aladdin summoned Yugo. With the giant's help, Alibaba hurled a wine jug into the beast, weakening it just enough to pull the girls free. However, the effort pushed him deeper inside the plant. Facing death, Alibaba felt no regrets, relieved he would never have to lie or look at Butyl's face again. Unwilling to let his friend die, Aladdin commanded his magical turban to gather the remaining wine barrels and drop them straight into the man-eating plant. Drunk on the massive influx of alcohol, the flower went limp and released Alibaba. While Alibaba rejoiced at surviving, Butyl threw a screaming tantrum over his ruined goods. Ignoring the merchant entirely, Yugo effortlessly carried the two boys away from the scene. It took them an entire day to finally reach the dungeon of Amon. Despite his lifelong dream of conquering a dungeon to change his fate, Alibaba hesitated as he stood before the menacing death trap. He turned to Aladdin, offering him one last chance to back out, but noticed the young boy didn't look well at all. Instead of answering, he collapsed forward, pushing Alibaba through the gate. After plummeting down an endless tunnel of sand, they arrived in a boundless, universe-like space. When he opened his eyes again, he was inside a cavern filled with water mixed with a strange, highly flammable black liquid. Reacting instantly, Alibaba hoisted Aladdin up and sprinted toward the exit just as ferocious flames erupted across the water's surface. After wandering further, a massive boulder rolled toward them, forcing them into another desperate sprint. Unable to outrun it, Aladdin summoned Yugo to carry them. The giant safely dodged the boulder as it crushed a bridge, then leapt into the abyss and returned to the flute. Alibaba tried to thank Aladdin, but noticed the boy was utterly drained of strength. Summoning Yugo cost a massive amount of stamina and left Aladdin ravenous. Alibaba encouraged him to hang in there, promising they would find food if they survived. However, when he briefly turned away to survey the area, Aladdin vanished. A giant green ant had taken his place and was actively trying to eat the screaming boy. Alibaba didn't hesitate, yanking Aladdin free from its jaws. Surrounded by a swarm of the creatures, Alibaba drew a small dagger and faced them head-on. He dodged their charges with lightning speed and struck back with deadly precision. He easily dispatched the large but fragile ants with razor-sharp slashes. Just as Alibaba was about to wipe them all out, the remaining ants suddenly dissolved and merged into a colossal, four-limbed monster that immediately sucked in a massive breath of air through grooves on its body. The monster unleashed a torrent of fire, but Alibaba grabbed Aladdin and dodged. Sensing the danger, Aladdin used his remaining strength to summon Yugo. The giant's punch shattered the creature's shoulder, but the wound instantly regenerated. Gritting through the pain, Aladdin blew his flute again, and a flickering purple energy cloaked Yugo's hands. As the monster spewed fire, Yugo caught the flames barehanded, clasped his fists together, and delivered a devastating, bomb-like blow. When the smoke cleared, only a massive crater remained. Aladdin completely lost consciousness after the battle. Suddenly, footsteps echoed through the dungeon. Alibaba peeked out and was shocked to see the cruel lord, Jamil, accompanied by the red-haired girl, Morgiana. Ignoring Alibaba, Jamil headed straight for the sleeping boy, reverently addressing him as a magi before attempting to take him away. When Alibaba intervened, Jamil ordered his hulking bodyguard, Goltas, to attack. Using his superior combat skills, Alibaba quickly turned the tables and subdued the guard. Impressed, Jamil callously struck down his defeated slave and commanded Alibaba to follow him instead. Confused by the man's twisted logic, but left with no other options, Alibaba complied. They soon reached a barrier of endlessly erupting and dying fire pillars. At the entrance stood a stone tablet inscribed with ancient text. While Jamil could barely decipher a few words, the highly educated Alibaba read the entire inscription flawlessly. Frustrated by his own inferiority, Jamil viciously stabbed Alibaba. Bleeding but determined to follow the tablet's instructions, Ali Baba became the first to leap and tumble safely through the towering flames. On the other side stood a stone dragon head. Ali Baba only needed to pull the lever inside to stop the flames for the others. However, a massive pillar of fire suddenly erupted right where he stood, seemingly incinerating him until only ash remained. Aladdin woke up just then. Jamil took him aside, hiding Ali Baba's apparent death and falsely claiming he had run off with the boy's flute. Sensing their inherent goodness, Morgiana felt a twinge of guilt and looked away. Jamil then left with his bodyguard to scout ahead, leaving Aladdin in Morgiana's care. Noticing Morgiana's tense expression, Aladdin tried desperately to make her laugh. She fought hard to hide her amusement before finally cracking a smile. While Aladdin could easily break her physical chains, he knew she was bound by invisible chains that only she could remove. Believing it to be true, Morgiana then gently revealed that Ali Baba was dead. Aladdin froze in heartbreak until Ali Baba's head suddenly popped out from above, nearly making Aladdin curse in shock. Ali Baba dropped down to greet them just as Jamil sprinted back, chased by a monster and completely shocked to see the boy alive. Ali Baba had intentionally kept the second half of the tablet's instructions a secret, allowing him to find the true path to conquer the dungeon and return for his friend. Shouting for Morgiana to break her invisible chains and return to her homeland one day, Aladdin ran off with Ali Baba. She used her powerful leg strength to launch off the walls to catch them, but it was too late. Ali Baba and Aladdin reached the top and pushed open the door of truth. To their shock, the room beyond seemingly dissolved into nothingness, revealing the cityscape stretching out below. However, Aladdin quickly realized they were still inside the dungeon, trapped beneath a massive transparent dome. Jamil was still trapped there, seething with rage because his slaves couldn't defeat the monster. Even in such a dire situation, the scumbag vented his frustration by viciously beating and kicking Morgiana. Meanwhile, Aladdin and Ali Baba soared safely through the air on a flying carpet. After a short flight, they finally reached the dungeon's true end, evident by the massive mountains of gold, silver, priceless treasures, and top-tier armor piled high. Before they could even celebrate, the massive body of Goltas crashed down from above with a thunderous thud, covered in severe burns and slash wounds. It was obvious who was responsible. Ali Baba's expression darkened, but before he could shout a warning, Morgiana launched herself like a cannonball. She kicked Aladdin so hard he slammed into the wall, leaving a deep dent that proved the devastating power of her strike. Jamil arrived shortly after, ordering Morgiana to watch over Aladdin while he dealt with Ali Baba. Ali Baba scoffed at the absurdity. He mocked Jamil, telling the little prince to go home to his mommy if he couldn't handle the danger. Infuriated by the insult, Jamil charged forward. Unintimidated, Ali Baba drew his own sword. Despite Jamil's loud boasting about his masterclass training, his attacks were full of openings, nothing more than a cat scratching at the air. But just as Ali Baba was about to finish him off, Jamil cried out for Morgiana. Ali Baba figured she couldn't close the distance in time, yet Morgiana arrived with unbelievable speed. Ali Baba barely dodged and fell back, unable to comprehend how such a powerful warrior could resign herself to slavery. He urged her to realize that in this dungeon, she could abandon Jamil without facing any punishment. Morgiana listened and approached as if moved by his words, but then abruptly grabbed his hand and hurled him into the wall. The devastating impact completely destroyed Ali Baba's ability to fight. Jamil ordered Morgiana to kill Ali Baba. She hesitated, as it would be her first time taking a life. Slowly approaching with a raised sword, she wavered briefly before bringing it down. Instantly, a flash of light burst forth, shattering the intact blade to pieces. Aladdin had cast a spell from afar and demanded his flute back. Naturally, Jamil refused, prompting Aladdin to prepare to take it by force. As golden magical spirits swirled around Aladdin like a storm, Jamil grew dangerously excited. 10 years ago, he had received a prophecy about the Magi, those who guide kings. Believing that being chosen would make him humanity's child of destiny, Morgiana moved to attack, but Aladdin set up a heavy gravity field. When she still managed to push through, he swung his staff, ultimately pinning Morgiana against the corner of the room. Witnessing this overwhelming power, Jamil obediently handed over the flute, though he still desperately hoped to be chosen as king. Aladdin outright rejected him. Aladdin then returned to Ali Baba, inviting him to continue their journey. Suddenly, glowing magic circles appeared, and a colossal pillar of fire erupted in the center of the room. As it subsided, a massive blue-skinned old man with a long white beard materialized, the jinn, Amon. He looked around, asking who among them was the king. Passing over Morgiana and Jamil, his gaze finally fell upon Aladdin, and he stepped forward to pay his respects to the Magi. Hugo immediately emerged from the flute, silently gesturing to Amon. The old jinn nodded in agreement and greeted Aladdin again, leaving the young boy deeply curious about what a Magi truly was. Magi are sorcerers chosen to guide ordinary humans into becoming wise and exceptional kings, as humanity cannot sustain itself without a leader. Suddenly, an enormous magic circle appeared overhead as another sorcerer attempted to seal the exit. Amon quickly gathered everyone to teleport them out. Morgiana hesitated, unsure of what to do. Goltus, still alive, limped over and urged her to escape, but to leave Jamil behind, declaring that his final wish was to see her return to her homeland. He cut Morgiana's chains and turned away. As the teleportation spell finished, Amon transferred himself into Ali Baba's sword sheath. Ali Baba still couldn't believe a coward like him had conquered a dungeon, but Aladdin strongly disagreed. He believed that someone who ignored personal mockery but risked everything to save others could never be weak. Aladdin was certain Ali Baba would become a great king and build a wonderful country. Their journey together ended there. Returning to the city, Ali Baba sat in the empty lot where the dungeon had vanished, while Morgiana stood outside the city walls, finally free. Instead of wasting his newfound fortune on women as everyone expected, Ali Baba nobly used every last coin to buy the freedom of all the slaves. Everyone. Meanwhile, Aladdin had been teleported to an entirely unfamiliar place. He woke up in a clean tent being cared for by a kind old woman named Baba, the chief of a historically powerful nomadic tribe. Looking at him, she recognized Aladdin as a child of the Rook, the golden butterfly-like creatures. The Rook were gentle, benevolent beings, and seeing Aladdin surrounded by them proved his good nature, giving Baba a very favorable impression of him. Their conversation was interrupted by returning scouts bearing grim news. The Ko Empire was aggressively expanding its territory, defeating opposing tribes, seizing their lands, and erasing their customs. However, the Kuga tribe refused to submit. Just as they had held back advances for centuries, the entire tribe was prepared to fight to protect their ancestral land. In the following days, Aladdin bonded deeply with the Kuga. Baba stayed by his side, explaining their way of life. They spent evenings eating, drinking, and singing together, treating every member like family, the very key to the tribe's generational survival. The next morning, the young men began carrying swords, a clear sign of approaching war. The women watched with worry, praying the conflict wouldn't permanently destroy their peaceful, joyful lives. Meanwhile, Aladdin tried to show off by riding a horse, but was violently bucked off. As he screamed helplessly, Dolge galloped over to help, but an elegantly dressed stranger caught the boy first. The woman introduced herself as Haikyuu, a princess of the Ko Empire, sent to negotiate their surrender as part of the Empire's ambition to unify the world. Though Haikyuu presented herself as a peacemaker who wished to avoid battle, surrender was completely out of the question for the Kuga. As tension rose, a young Kuga girl offered the princess some milk. Hakui's arrogant bodyguard shoved the girl to the ground, insulting the tribe's way of life and calling the drink filthy swill. Furious, Dolge drew his blade and slashed at the man, but was luckily held back before he could kill him and officially declare war. Sensing the rapidly deteriorating situation, Haikyuu ordered her group to withdraw. That evening, Aladdin sought out the princess to talk. He didn't hide his special nature and directly asked Haikyuu if she planned to start a war. Haikyuu immediately answered no, explaining that unification through peace is always more complete than through brutality. She promised to find every possible way to make the Kuga tribe compromise rather than fight. Eager to share this good news, Aladdin hurried back to discuss it with Baba. However, trouble struck their village that night when Imperial soldiers kidnapped the young women. Renowned for their battle prowess, the Kuga warriors were highly valued. Upon hearing the news, Dolge and his group rode after the kidnappers like the wind. Imperial soldiers fired arrows from their horse-drawn wagons, but the Kuga warriors split into two flanks, easily closing the distance and returning fire. Seeing the Imperial soldiers, Dolge wanted to cut them down on the spot. But remembering Baba's warning that killing even one would start a war, he stayed his hand. When Aladdin returned, he was deeply worried about everyone's safety, but Baba remained calm, having full faith in her warriors. Instead, she was far more curious about Aladdin's identity. Being surrounded by Rook and mastering a giant made him just like the Magi of legend. To Baba, Aladdin perfectly fit the legend, though she didn't dwell on it. Just then, Dolge and his group returned victorious. Gathering around a fire, Baba announced her decision to surrender to the Ko Empire, not out of fear, but out of a duty to protect their peaceful lives. All that mattered to her was watching the children grow up safely. It seemed the conflict was finally resolved, but later, while she was alone, an arrow shot from the darkness and struck Baba. She was discovered shortly after, barely breathing, and Aladdin quickly helped bring her in for treatment. By the next morning, the entire Kuga tribe was in an uproar. Enraged by the blatant insult and provocation of their leader being struck down, they felt there was no reason left to hold back from war with the Empire. The Kuga warriors were ready to grab their swords and cut the Imperial soldiers to pieces. Dolge tried to remind them that Baba always opposed war and championed a life of peace, but fury blinded their reason. Seizing their weapons, they rode across the grasslands toward the Ko Empire's encampment. Simultaneously, the Empire's side received word that one of their soldiers was attacked while on patrol, found with a Kuga arrow in his body. Hakui's treacherous aide, Ryosai, used this to stir up trouble, pushing to mobilize the army and crush the Kuga. However, Hakui didn't believe the report, knowing the Kuga tribe had shown a strong desire for peace. She insisted on going herself to confirm the situation. As soon as she entered the valley, an arrow struck the ground before her. A group of Kuga warriors was already waiting. Showing neither anger nor fear, Hakui dismounted and expressed her wish to negotiate. The warriors didn't believe her, accusing her of deceit and plotting behind their backs. The lead warrior didn't hesitate to bring his blade down, leaving a shallow cut across Hakui's face. Yet, she didn't panic, simply dodging to demonstrate her sincerity. The warriors remained unconvinced until Baba endured immense pain to come forward and shout for them to stop. Enduring the pain, Baba declared the Kuga tribe's surrender to the Ko Empire. Hakui noticed the old woman's wound, immediately understanding the conflict had been orchestrated from the shadows. She expressed concern for Baba. Hakui immediately pledged to ensure peace and safety for everyone in the Kuga tribe. Back at the camp, everyone gathered around Baba's bedside as she drew her final breath. Aladdin could see her sitting there, deeply saddened but not crying due to their short time together. Only after death could Baba truly see through to Aladdin's identity as a magi. Heading back to camp, Hakui knew she had to deal with her treacherous supervisor, Ryosai. Suddenly, he arrived with his troops, visibly shocked to see her alive. His original plan was for the enraged Kuga warriors to kill the princess, giving him an excuse to slaughter the tribe in revenge. Unfazed by her survival, Ryosai simply decided to execute her right there and pin the blame on Baba's people anyway. At his command, soldiers unleashed a volley of arrows at Hakui. Just as they were about to strike, the arrows froze in midair and dropped to the ground. As a dungeon conqueror, the princess naturally possessed extraordinary power. Her attendant also used wind magic, cutting through a charging squad with a single slash. Behind him, Hakui entered her battle form, summoning tornado-like winds that sent soldiers flying. However, this massive magical output nearly depleted the energy stored in her divine vessel. After unleashing one final strike to clear the field, Hakui moved to seize the traitor, only to be shocked by an even larger army standing behind him. Exhausted, she and her forces were quickly overwhelmed. Surrounded by soldiers, she defiantly challenged Ryosai to a final duel. The cowardly schemer pretended to accept, only to have his soldiers shoot her in the back, bringing her to her knees. Having lost all hope, Hakui braced for death, until a thunderous crash erupted beside her. As the dust cleared, Yugo and Aladdin stood there. With a single, effortless swat, Yugo sent Ryosai tumbling across the ground like a rag doll. At the blast site, not a single enemy survived. Astonished by the boy's power, Hakuei asked who he was, and Aladdin finally declared himself a magi. He touched her divine vessel, summoning her jinn to the outside world. Yugo appeared as well, gesturing silently as before. Instead of explaining Aladdin's identity, Hakuei's jinn formally introduced her as a dungeon conqueror and a rightful king candidate. Through this brief exchange, Aladdin learned that other magi existed in the world. Once the dust settled, he returned to bid a heartfelt farewell to the Kuga tribe. As a token of their eternal friendship, they gifted him Baba's staff. Carrying the tribe's warmth with him, Aladdin resumed his journey of self-discovery. Meanwhile, Morgiana was living a peaceful life with two kind merchant girls, Layla and Sasa. They didn't care about her dark past. As long as she was a good person willing to work, they gladly took her in, providing a decent job, food, and shelter. When Morgiana struggled to express her deep gratitude, Layla warmly told her not to worry. Having relied on the kindness of others to survive herself, the girls noticed many merchants desperately fleeing Chishan. They learned that ruthless bandits were exploiting the instability in Balbad, raiding everywhere and sparing no one. Deep in thought about their group's future, Layla accidentally bumped into a man. Before she could scold him, the sickening clink of iron chains revealed he was a slaver dragging a line of captives. The sight disgusted them all, but it struck Morgiana the hardest. The very idea of shackling and selling human beings for pocket change revolted her. Though she was finally free, the deep scars from years of chains still marked her legs, and she wished they would disappear forever. That night, the ordeal haunted Morgiana's dreams. Memories of her cruel former master and years of torment explained why, even with her physical chains broken, she still struggled to truly embrace her freedom. The next morning, she visited a merchant caravan that regularly traveled to trade goods. Their planned route led straight to Balbad, but they were forced to halt because ruthless bandits had seized a critical point along the road. Just days prior, a friend's caravan had clashed with the thugs, resulting in stolen goods and tragically lost lives. Despite the extreme danger, Morgiana remained determined. Reaching Balbad was her only way home. She raced toward the bandit hideout that very night. Thanks to her miraculously powerful legs, standing boldly before the bandits, she ordered them to pack up and leave, or she would kick them out herself. The thugs burst out laughing, and a massive bandit swaggered over with a disgusting leer. Before he could even react, Morgiana punched him so hard, he instantly dropped unconscious. The laughter stopped immediately. The rest drew their blades and rushed her, but Morgiana treated their encirclement like a dance floor. The sheer power in her legs allowed her to gracefully dodge and attack simultaneously. After she had beaten most of them senseless, a dangerous-looking bandit charged in with a warhammer, boasting about showing her how a real man fights. Before he could swing, Morgiana planted her foot squarely in his face, following up with a relentless flurry of punches that completely destroyed him. Watching the fight from the shadows, the slave trader from earlier that morning recognized Morgiana as a member of the southern continent's most formidable warrior tribe and immediately decided to capture her. A crow suddenly swooped down and attacked, but the bird's scratch carried a paralyzing poison. It quickly clouded her consciousness, and she blacked out completely. When Morgiana regained consciousness, a heavy iron shackle locked her ankle. Beside her sat Nadia, a young girl captured by slavers during the chaos in Balbad. Unsure of her fate, Nadia listened in horror as Morgiana described the reality of a slave's life. Endless beatings, unbreakable chains, and being worked harder than a dog until death. Terrified of living that way, the young girl burst into tears, crying out for her lost parents to save her. Remembering feeling the exact same desperate terror as a child, when she begged for help but no one answered, Morgiana pulled Nadia into her arms and promised she wouldn't let the same thing happen to her. The next morning, Layla and Sasa realized Morgiana was missing. Knowing she must have headed toward Balbad and encountered the bandits, the two girls scrambled to follow her. The local merchants, finally fed up with the thugs, banded together with drawn swords to join the rescue. Meanwhile, Morgiana woke up to find Nadia burning with a severe fever. When she called for the slavers to help the girl, they callously replied that since they were out of hyena food, they would just feed the low-value slave to the animals instead of wasting resources treating her illness. As they lowered the rope holding Nadia, the hungry hyenas leaped up, snapping and clawing at her. Morgiana frantically stomped on her own shackles, trying to break them to save the girl, but the slaver mockingly told her not to bother. But suddenly, mysterious spirits appeared, and Golta's voice echoed in her mind, asking if she had truly given up and believed she would be bound by chains forever. Reminding her she was no longer shackled by the slave system, his words gave her newfound strength just as the rope holding Nadia snapped. Morgiana launched herself into the air and brought her foot down with incredible force, completely shattering the unbreakable metal shackles. With a thunderous roar, a violent gust of wind erupted around her, sending both hyenas and slavers fleeing in absolute terror. In a panic, the slave trader released a pack of massive, ferocious saber-toothed tigers to kill her. However, when Morgiana charged in, each devastating kick she delivered landed like a sledgehammer to the skull. Tiger fangs flew as the enormous beasts crashed to the ground one after another. Terrified by the spectacle, the slave trader's henchmen tried to flee, but Morgiana intercepted them, demanding the keys to free the captives. Among the prisoners were Nadia's parents and, shockingly, Aladdin. It was unbelievable that someone with his power had been caught. When the slavers regrouped to attack, they were out of luck. Aladdin had already retrieved his flute. He summoned Hugo, who swiftly dealt each thug a devastating punch. Layla and her merchant group arrived just then. Instead of being frightened by the giant, they were overjoyed to reunite with Aladdin, who had helped them in the past. After a lively rescue celebration filled with food and dancing, Aladdin and Morgiana parted ways with the caravan. They headed toward Balbad, continuing the journey toward her homeland just as he had promised. Crossing the desert, they finally reached a lush, green land. As always, Morgiana was so intensely grateful for the help she received that she practically wanted to enshrine her saviors on an altar with offerings. Despite Aladdin begging her to relax, she remained deeply thankful to both him and Ali Baba, eagerly anticipating their eventual reunion. A strange man wearing absolutely nothing but a single leaf stepped into their path with a bright smile. Aladdin seriously considered summoning Hugo to punch him, but the man, Sinbad, quickly explained his predicament. He had passed out drunk on the road and woken up completely robbed. Thankfully, the kind-hearted Aladdin offered him a pair of pants so he could decently show his face in public. Aladdin introduced himself as an adventurer, leaving Sinbad fascinated by his incredible desert journeys. Hearing their destination was Balbad, Sinbad told them to take a deep breath. Catching the salty tang in the wind, they looked ahead and were greeted by an unbelievable sight. A bustling, prosperous city nestled beside a vast, endless blue sea. They had finally reached Balbad. Balbad had been a flourishing nation since ancient times, but it currently faced thorny problems. Protest banners against the monarchy were everywhere, and an active resistance group stirred up a commotion that the royal army couldn't handle. Sinbad took Aladdin and Morgiana to his favorite hotel in Balbad, offering to cover their expenses as thanks for the clothes. However, guards stopped him at the entrance due to his suspicious appearance. Fortunately, two of his wealthy companions spotted him and vouched for his entry. Having business to attend to, Sinbad split from the group. While being escorted to their room, Aladdin asked about ships heading south. He learned that travel was disrupted by a popular gang of supernatural bandits who used the city's fog to raid nobles and merchant ships, distributing the stolen goods to the commoners. Their highly effective leader was known as the miraculous Ali Baba. Meanwhile, Sinbad met with Balbad's mediocre and incompetent king to negotiate re-establishing trade. The king agreed to talk, but only on the condition that Sinbad dealt with the troublesome bandits first, a mission he reluctantly accepted. When they later reconvened, Aladdin excitedly summoned Hugo, revealing to Sinbad that the boy was a magi. In return, Sinbad fully introduced himself as a legendary king who had conquered 7 dungeons, mastered 7 jinn, and founded his own nation. Despite this impressive resume, the inexperienced Aladdin had no idea who he was. Sighing in defeat, Sinbad pushed past the bruised ego and asked for Aladdin's help in capturing the Balbad bandits. However, Aladdin didn't care about the danger. He only wanted Sinbad to ask the king for help finding Ali Baba once the job was finished. Before starting, Aladdin and Morgiana questioned if capturing the popular bandits was the right thing to do, given their public support. Sinbad also had doubts, but believed distributing stolen goods was just an excuse for wrongdoing, so the mission continued. With 2 likely targets identified, the group split up. Meanwhile, Sinbad's group was keeping watch when a fat merchant began yelling at them. Suddenly, a desperate crowd from the slums poured in, including a frail, starving woman holding an emaciated baby. She scrambled to eat a discarded chicken leg off the ground. Sinbad stopped her, stating that the nobility's wealth came from the people, and told them to eat what they deserved. He stepped aside to let the slum dwellers loot the merchant freely, knowing he wasn't breaking his agreement since his only mission was to capture the fog bandits. Over with the other group, pink smoke suddenly filled the fog. Sensing danger, Morgiana grabbed Aladdin and leaped into the air just as the guards below inhaled the hallucinogenic poison and began attacking each other. The bandits emerged, led by a woman wielding the special smoke-producing sword. Another bandit used a corrosive liquid blade to blow the door wide open. As the thieves rushed inside, Jafar launched ropes from above, binding several of them. Before he could capture the rest, a bandit attacked with a sword billowing black smoke, pinning Jafar down. Morgiana charged in with all her might, but was also overpowered. Seeing this from above, Aladdin had no choice but to summon Hugo. Faced with the massive giant blocking their path, many of the panicked bandits attempted to flee. While some bandits tried to fight, a figure with a wrapped head stepped forward and looked Aladdin directly in the eye. When the cloth was removed, it revealed Ali Baba. The reunion was both unexpected and painful. Aladdin couldn't understand how someone who had conquered dungeons and freed slaves had become a bandit, but Ali Baba offered no explanation. As the royal army closed in, Ali Baba drew his sword and invoked the strength of Aman. A massive blaze erupted with terrifying force. Before the power of a metal vessel, the soldiers were insignificant and could only watch as the bandits escaped. Upon returning to their hideout, Aladdin was introduced to 3 members who turned out to be the thieves who had robbed Sinbad of everything. Ali Baba was clearly irritated by Qasim bringing in random recruits, fearing it would lead to trouble. However, thanks to those recruits, the children in the group finally had food. Seeing the genuine joy on their faces after a simple meal suggested why Ali Baba had chosen this life. Back in his room, Ali Baba felt an invisible presence. The moment he lay down, Morgiana appeared, clamping her hand over his mouth and threatening to smash his face if he screamed. She told him that Aladdin had traveled countless miles to find him, only to be met with disappointment. When Ali Baba refused to explain himself, Morgiana hoisted him up and leapt out of the hideout, ignoring his cries for help. Meanwhile, Aladdin was so deeply disappointed he had no energy left to move. Just as he was sinking into despair, Morgiana hurled Ali Baba into the room. Finally, Ali Baba began to speak, starting with the story of his childhood friend and the true leader of the bandits, Qasim. The two had grown up together in the slums, a place filled with nothing but garbage. Ali Baba's mother was a kind and warm-hearted woman who loved him deeply. Though she was a courtesan, her character was reflected in the righteous person Ali Baba became. In contrast, Qasim was cursed with a father who forced his children to steal liquor and beat them if they failed. Eventually, the man disappeared, and Ali Baba's mother took Qasim and his sister, Mariam, into her home. Their happiest days were short-lived, however, as their mother soon died from a devastating illness. While Ali Baba and Mariam wept, Qasim remained stoic, focused solely on their survival. Eventually, Qasim grew exhausted from honest work and began robbing merchants. Sometime later, the king of Balbad appeared, revealing that Ali Baba was his long-lost son and offering to take him to the palace. When Ali Baba sought Qasim's advice, Qasim reacted with undisguised hatred, telling him to get lost. Heartbroken and furious, Ali Baba fought his friend before leaving the slums behind. Life in the palace was difficult, as Ali Baba had to master swordsmanship, scholarship, and royal etiquette. 3 years of training transformed the slum boy into a noble prince, yet he never stopped missing his old life. When he finally returned to the slums, he found the area cleared, but eventually ran into Kasim. Overjoyed and oblivious to the calculating look in Kasim's eyes, Ali Baba spent the night drinking with his old friend. In his drunken state, he accidentally revealed the location of a secret tunnel he used to sneak out of the palace. Later, as the king lay on his deathbed, he expressed his wish for Ali Baba to inherit the throne instead of his lazy, incompetent older brother, Ahmad. Ali Baba's only concern was his mother, and the king confessed he truly loved her and regretted failing to protect her from palace life. Suddenly, a commotion erupted. Ali Baba stepped out to find Kasim and his gang using the secret tunnel to ransack the palace. Before he could act, Ali Baba was struck from behind and knocked unconscious. The king, witnessing his palace engulfed in flames and his wealth plundered, died from the shock that same night. Ali Baba fled Balbad, his heart heavy with guilt. Kasim's hatred for the monarchy was born from a horrific betrayal. A year after Ali Baba had moved to the palace, a plague struck the slums. Instead of providing aid, the king ordered a brutal lockdown, leaving the poor to die. Mariam perished in the chaos, and the king eventually ordered the entire district burned to the ground to contain the illness. Kasim had burned the palace in retaliation for his home and his sister. Upon learning this, Ali Baba's hatred vanished. Kasim knew that as a thief, he could never lead Balbad. The people would never trust him. But Ali Baba, possessing the legitimate royal bloodline, could actually change lives. Together, they devised a plan to rob the wealthy and support the poor. Suddenly, a crash rang out as Kasim's crew arrived to rescue Ali Baba, knowing he was being held where Sinbad, the man hunting them, stayed. Unsure of Aladdin's support, Ali Baba retreated to the rooftop with Morgiana in pursuit. When Sinbad reached the roof, Kasim tried to bind him with his sword's power, but Sinbad broke free with ease. His companion, Masrur, a fellow Finalis, launched himself like a cannonball, tearing through the bandits until they were utterly helpless. Eventually, Sinbad captured Kasim, holding a blade to his head to pressure Ali Baba into a duel. Kasim urged Ali Baba to flee, but Ali Baba refused to abandon his comrades or the foundation of his new nation. Invoking Amon's power, he created a wall of flames to duel Sinbad alone. Though Ali Baba utilized the fast and deadly royal sword style of Balbad, he looked like an amateur against Sinbad, who ended the fight with a single punch. Surprisingly, Sinbad then offered to join the bandits, claiming that helping those fighting for a better life was more meaningful than serving a foolish king. The duel had merely been a test of Ali Baba's worth. The next morning, the Fog Troop called the citizens to the palace for a major declaration. Sinbad escorted Ali Baba to face King Ahmad, where Ali Baba argued that the bandits only existed because the monarchy failed to protect its people. He promised that the Fog Troop would disband if the king guaranteed food and shelter for all. In response to this earnest appeal, Ahmad offered nothing but utter contempt. "A brat picked up from the garbage is no brother of mine," Ahmad sneered, refusing to recognize Ali Baba's royal standing. He declared that Ali Baba had no right to speak without Sinbad's backing. Furious, Ali Baba tried to charge forward but was restrained by guards. Outside, the anxious crowd waited for news. Aladdin hoped for a peaceful resolution until a mysterious figure passed by. The stranger's presence felt like a void. This figure entered the palace to an enthusiastic welcome from the useless Ahmad. The king's sudden confidence stemmed from the support of the Co-Empire. Alongside the mysterious newcomer was a financial advisor who demanded that Ahmad surrender control of the national economy. This meant the fate of the entire nation would rest in the empire's hands. However, a loyal few remained, needing to hear the truth from Ali Baba. Overwhelmed by their trust, Ali Baba felt like a failure. Aladdin comforted him, noting that standing up for the people was a victory in itself, as it had ignited a quiet flame of resistance. Sinbad then stepped forward to address the people, formally announcing that every proposal had been rejected. He declared that since peaceful negotiations failed, it was time for action. He urged them to pick up their swords and fight against inequality and poverty. Sinbad pledged that if Ahmad sent his strongest warriors, he would handle them personally, and if the city denied them their rights, he would take them in. Just as the momentum built, Juder appeared again, making the air heavy with tension. Unlike those who fight for justice, Juder only desired earth-shattering conflict. Serving the Ko-Empire provided him with hundreds of thousands of soldiers, the perfect fuel for a world-shaking war. Juder initially expressed interest in battling Sinbad, but his focus shifted abruptly to Aladdin. Both had sensed each other's presence from the start, noticing the eerie contrast in the rook surrounding them. When Juder realized Aladdin was also a magi, he was stunned, having believed he was the only one. He mockingly greeted Aladdin by poking him in the eye, then turned his scorn toward Alibaba. He burst into laughter, calling a dungeon conqueror who was bullied by a mediocre king a useless waste. Juder gathered the rook and unleashed a barrage of light beams, which Aladdin blocked and reflected using a barrier of Magoi. Realizing that a raw Magoi clash was going nowhere, Juder switched to magic, a specialized energy derived from the rook that allows for complex spells. A bolt of lightning tore through Aladdin's Magoi barrier, but when the dust settled, the boy remained unharmed. Yugo had entered the fray to protect him. This only excited Juder further. He gathered the fog of Balbad, converted it into water, and then into massive blocks of ice. Rising into the sky, Juder shattered the ice into countless shards and rained them down on the crowd. Yugo acted as his shield, smashing the ice to pieces before leaping into the air to deliver a blow that sent Juder crashing into the earth. Protected by his own barrier, Juder suffered only minor injuries. Seeing an opening, he directed the remaining ice shards straight at Aladdin. Aladdin couldn't react in time, so Yugo shielded him, taking the ice shards deep into his own body. As the giant struggled to move, Aladdin poured more Magoi into him to push the ice out. Yugo's hands shot up and clapped together like swatting a mosquito, crushing Juder between them. The magical barrier shattered, and by the time Juder slipped free, he was unconscious and battered to the brink of death. Yugo didn't stop, raising his hands as purple flames erupted. Sensing a terrifying shift, Sinbad ordered everyone to run. As Yugo's fists crashed down, the ground shattered, and a deafening shockwave leveled the plaza, leaving behind an impossibly deep crater. Despite the destruction, Juder was still alive. Suddenly, an enormous carpet carrying a legion of soldiers appeared in the sky. They were from the Ko-Empire, and several possessed powerful metal vessels. Seeing Juder's mangled state, the girl at the front, Kagyoku, remained eerily calm. Kagyoku was only mildly surprised to see Juder beaten so badly. Kagyoku then fully unleashed her power. Her pin transformed into a razor-sharp sword. As Yugo charged again, a massive, blade-like column of water pierced his chest, leaving a gaping hole. The damage was too severe, and Yugo disintegrated, retreating into the flute. As Kagyoku prepared to leave, Aladdin lunged forward in a rage, accusing her of starting the conflict while Yugo only sought to protect the people. Showing no remorse, she ordered her 3 powerful subordinates to descend and slaughter everyone below. These warriors were dangerous. One matched Masra in strength, another outpaced Morgiana, and the third traded blows evenly with Alibaba. Just as Kagyoku prepared to attack Aladdin, Sinbad intervened. Recognizing her as a princess of the Ko-Empire, he used his charm to de-escalate the situation. Flustered by his handsome face, Kagyoku's aggression vanished. She agreed to withdraw, though she insisted she was leaving of her own accord to save face. Despite the intervention of Sinbad and his companions, the battle had already taken a heavy toll, leaving many civilians caught in the crossfire. While tending to the wounded, Alibaba checked on his companions downstairs, only for Morgiana to walk in at a highly awkward moment. Fortunately, he explained the situation before a massive misunderstanding could take root. They discovered Aladdin lying unconscious outside. The flute no longer bore its star, a sign that Aladdin had nearly drained his own Magoi to heal the people. This was a life-threatening mistake. Had they found him any later, it would have been a funeral. One crisis barely ended before the next arrived. The bandits demanded to know what the future held for them, but Alibaba hesitated. Sinbad stepped in, reaffirming his unwavering promise that his nation would provide aid to everyone. Shortly after, a horse-drawn carriage arrived, led by the general who had once trained Alibaba. Inside was Sabmad, Alibaba's timid second brother. Sinbad was surprised to learn that Sabmad had been the mole secretly aiding the Fog Troop. He pleaded with Alibaba to save the nation before their eldest brother, Abmad, whose character was defective from birth, destroyed it completely. Following the former king's death, a banker from the Ko Empire arrived as a financial expert. Under Abmad's rule, the economy had already plummeted into poverty. The banker tricked the clueless king into replacing gold and silver with paper currency backed by the empire. While this initially made trade convenient, it led to the catastrophic problem of inflation. The value of paper money plummeted so rapidly that a loaf of bread tripled in price overnight. Instead of fixing the currency, the banker introduced predatory credit services, allowing the nation to borrow as much as it wanted, provided they put up land sovereignty, maritime rights, and national resources as collateral. To maintain his lavish lifestyle, Abmad kept borrowing until the country was completely hollowed out. When the court realized they were flat broke, the king callously suggested selling the people's human rights, effectively turning Balbad into a massive slave factory. Sabmad trembled with fury and pain as he finished the story. He had risked everything to reveal this nightmare, begging Alibaba to stop their brother at all costs. There were only 5 days left. Once Abmad married the princess, the slave contract would be finalized. The general urged Sabmad to leave before his treachery was discovered, leaving Alibaba in a heavy silence. With Aladdin still in a coma, Alibaba felt utterly lost. He looked at Sinbad, a man who seemed to handle every crisis with effortless grace, and felt his own confidence shatter. "Someone as weak as me really can't do anything," he lamented. Sinbad, seeing this, felt a flicker of disappointment. He knew the country couldn't be saved through ordinary means. It needed a leader who truly cared, but Alibaba seemed too fragile and lacked the self-assurance required for the task. Sinbad gathered everyone to strategize. However, they hit a wall. Despite Sinbad's many global allies, none were willing to help once they learned the Ko Empire was involved. Sinbad revealed the secret to Ko's staggering growth, Juder. As their magi, he summoned numerous dungeons for the Empire's royalty to conquer, amassing an army of metal vessel users. Since a direct confrontation with Ko was too risky, Sinbad decided to focus on removing Abmad first. In a private moment, Sinbad shared that he had been close friends with Alibaba's father. Because of that bond, he offered to personally train Alibaba to master his metal vessel and ascend as a king. But Alibaba immediately shut him down, insisting it was impossible for someone like him. Sinbad pressed him, asking if he had considered the weight of his responsibility. Between his brother Sabmad's desperation and the hope of the people at the palace, the world was already looking to Alibaba as the only solution. Deeply conflicted, Alibaba walked the streets to clear his head. Seeing mothers and children reminded him of his own childhood and the terrifying reality that, without his intervention, these people would soon be sold into slavery. His reflection was cut short when a rope yanked him onto a boat. It was Qasim and his group, who had escaped notice and were now regrouping. Qasim revealed his intention for total war against the monarchy. Beside him stood a shadowy arms dealer, the very man who had tipped Qasim off about the impending slave contract. The people of Balbad were pushed to their absolute breaking point. Qasim and the arms dealer planned to arm the citizenry with everything from blades to Gatling guns, arguing that human rights had to be taken back by force. Alibaba was horrified, realizing the staggering body count such a war would produce. The disagreement turned physical. Qasim punched Alibaba, declaring him useless due to his lack of resolve. That afternoon, a worried Sinbad was surprised when Alibaba approached him, finally asking to be trained in the use of his metal vessel. Though Alibaba hid the details of his confrontation with Qasim, Sinbad was pleased to see the boy's sudden spark of determination. He began explaining the mechanics of Jinn weapon equip and Jinn equip. While a magi can summon a Jinn's physical form, a human must learn to use Magoi to weaponize their vessel. This starts with Jinn weapon equip, where the user envelopes their weapon in Magoi to manifest the Jinn's power, such as Amon's flames. Alibaba struggled. He pushed himself until he was completely drained, yet Amon's flames refused to ignite in their true sacred form. Surprisingly, Sinbad wasn't disappointed. Seeing Ali Baba's raw effort and potential, he admitted the young man had talent worth anticipating. However, the peace was fleeting. Sinbad received intelligence that suspicious figures were moving in the shadows, threatening to unleash even more chaos. To buy more time, Sinbad planned to use his charms to convince Princess Kagyoku to call off the wedding. Jafar and the others, recalling how easily she was flustered by him. Guilt weighed heavily on Ali Baba as he visited the still unconscious Aladdin. He felt responsible for his friend's state, but Morgiana offered a different perspective. For Aladdin, helping a friend wasn't a burden, it was an honor. Bolstered by her words, Ali Baba resolved to act and marched toward the royal palace. Outside the gates, the scene was desperate. Starving citizens, their bodies skeletal from hunger, clamored for the basic necessities of life. Meanwhile, inside the palace, King Ahmad remained willfully ignorant, indulging in luxury and his own base desires. When Ali Baba identified himself and demanded entry, the guards initially refused, but the starving crowd turned their fury toward the soldiers, pelting them with stones until they were forced to open the gates. In a different part of the palace, Princess Kagyoku lamented her fate. To her, this marriage was a cold political transaction. As the Ko-Empire aimed for global unification, Balbad's strategic position as a world gateway made her a necessary sacrifice. Her thoughts drifted to Sinbad, the only man who had sparked a sense of genuine affection in her. Ahmad was busy admiring the brutality of these subordinates when he spotted Ali Baba being surrounded by palace guards. His hatred for his brother boiled over instantly. He ordered the banker to eliminate Ali Baba immediately. One of the Empire's monsters stepped forward to do the deed. Tearing away the cloth covering his face, the man underwent a grotesque biological transformation. He grew into a colossal, three-trunked elephant. Ali Baba took the initiative, unleashing a blade of fire that looked spectacular but only managed to push the massive monster back. As the beast counterattacked, he found himself trapped in a cycle of canceling out blows without dealing any real damage. Realizing he was outmatched, he desperately tried to force a Jinn weapon equip, but only produced a pillar of fire that drained his mental energy without increasing his power. Exhausted from his attempts to control his Magoi, Ali Baba took a direct hit that left him bleeding and helpless on the ground. As the monster's foot descended to crush him, he experienced a flash of his entire life. His parents, the suffering people of Balbad, and the disappointed faces of those he had let down. Finally, the image of Aladdin's unwavering belief in him snapped him back to reality. He charged with a single, devastating slash that cleaved the mountain-sized creature in two. To the astonishment of the onlookers, his short dagger had transformed into a pitch-black, razor-sharp sword, the true form of Amon's sword. The battle wasn't over. From the remains of the beast, a swarm of regenerating monkeys emerged. While Ali Baba could cut them down, they simply multiplied unless incinerated by Amon's flames, a process that drained his Magoi at an alarming rate. Just as he prepared for a final, desperate charge against the lead monkey, Morgiana plummeted from the sky and slammed her feet into the creature's face. Recognizing the same look in Ali Baba's eyes as when he left Chishan, she had followed him to the palace. When he urged her to leave for her own safety, she responded with a thunderous finalis roar that sent the monkeys fleeing in sheer terror, proving once and for all that she was no longer a helpless slave, but a powerful warrior. Seeing that Ali Baba was losing momentum, she scooped him up and hurled him forward like a projectile, launching him deeper into the palace so he could reach the king without wasting another second. Left alone to hold the line, Morgiana faced the swarm of regenerating monkeys. Her legs, coming down like sledgehammers, crushed them easily, but their replication ability meant they wouldn't stay down. Recalling the explosive speed Masterer had used previously, she adapted her tactics. She found the perfect angle, whipped around, and drove a devastating kick clean through the lead monkey's body. The impact was so immense that as she landed, a nearby tower toppled, sending a shockwave through the palace that made everyone's blood run cold. Inside the palace, Ali Baba faced the final monster. He nearly ended the fight with his first strike. His Magoi was completely spent. By the time Ali Baba reached the royal council chamber, he was running on empty. A frantic Ahmad ordered his guards to seize him, and for a moment, it seemed the guards would comply despite Ali Baba's pleas for a peaceful negotiation. Then, the unthinkable happened. The usually timid Sabmad stepped forward, ordering the general to intervene. Ahmad was stunned, accusing his younger brother of staging a coup. But Sabmad, inspired by Ali Baba's relentless courage, refused to be a bystander any longer. He seized the royal scepter and declared his authority. I am the Vice King of Balbad. I order all soldiers to cease any action that obstructs negotiations. Anyone who disobeys will be executed without mercy.